My husband drained our son's emergency medical fund to buy a digital video game costume, and then he live-streamed himself, calling me a parasite to 3,000 strangers. I am sitting on the floor of a cold motel room, shaking uncontrollably, wondering how the man I served faithfully for 10 years could turn into a monster who planted drugs in my purse to frame me as an unfit mother. He made me beg for pennies to buy bread while he was hiding $50,000 in a secret account for his mother. He watched me cry over our sick child and laughed about it with his online friends. He thought I was weak. He thought he could steal my child and throw me on the street without a fight. But he forgot that a mother pushed to the edge does not break. She explodes. I exposed his secrets. I destroyed his career. I took everything from him, just like he tried to take everything from me. But now, looking at the wreckage of my family and my hollow ring finger, I feel like I have lost a part of my soul. Is it really justice if it hurts this much? Please tell me, did I do the right thing? My name is Layla Vance. I am 34 years old. Though some mornings, when the gray Seattle light filters through the blinds, I feel a century older. To the neighbors in our meticulously manicured subdivision in Bellevue, Washington, I am the enviable stay-at-home mom. I am the woman who brings organic, gluten-free cupcakes to the bake sale and whose windows are always sparkling clean. To the Internal Revenue Service, I am a hobbyist, a former senior marketing executive who traded a six-figure salary and pantsuits for an Etsy shop selling hand-woven macrame wall hangings. But inside the walls of this 4-bedroom craftsman house, I am something else entirely. I am a peacekeeper, a professional eggshell walker. It was a Tuesday in mid-November, the kind of day where the rain does not fall so much as it hangs in the air, soaking into your bones. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic clicking of a mechanical keyboard coming from the upstairs study. That sound, the rapid-fire clack, 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 used to annoy me. Now, it just signaled that Mark was home, physically present, but mentally miles away in a digital landscape where he was a king, not just a mid-level manager at a logistics firm. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the granite countertop for the third time that morning. I told myself I was being thorough, but deep down, I knew I was just anxious. Mark liked things clean, not just clean, pristine. If the house looked perfect, maybe our marriage would feel perfect. 2. Mommy. My chest hurts. The small, wheezy voice broke my trance. I turned to see Leo, my 4-year-old son, standing in the doorway. His face was flushed, a sickly crimson, and his breathing was shallow, a high-pitched whistle escaping his lips with every exhale. My heart hammered against my ribs. The asthma. It is okay, baby. I cooed, dropping the rag and scooping him up. His skin was burning. I checked the medicine cabinet in the bathroom, my hands trembling slightly. The inhaler was empty. The backup bottle of nebulizer solution was dry. I had let it run low. I had been so focused on keeping the living room rug vacuumed in perfect parallel lines that I had forgotten the refill. Guilt, sharp and cold, pierced through me. We are going to the pharmacy. Leo, just breathe for mommy, okay? Slow breaths. I buckled him into his car seat, his small chest heaving, and drove to the Walgreens 5 minutes away. The rain lashed against the windshield, distorting the suburban streets into a blur of gray and green. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, checking Leo's color. He was pale, eyes closed. At the pharmacy counter, the fluorescent lights hummed loudly. The pharmacist, A kind woman named Sarah, who knew us by name, handed me the bag. That will be $45.50. Layla, she said with a warm smile. I pulled out the joint debit card, the navy blue one, with both our names embossed in silver. I swiped it. Declined. I blinked. That could not be right. Mark had been paid on Friday. It was only Tuesday. We should have had at least $3,000 in the checking account for bills and groceries. Sorry. The chip is probably dusty, I said, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle to my own ears. I swiped again. Insufficient funds. The words on the small terminal screen seemed to mock me. My stomach dropped. The line behind me shifted impatiently. A man in a raincoat sighed loudly. Is there a problem? Sarah asked, her voice dropping to a discreet whisper. I do not understand. I stammered. There must be a mistake with the bank. I fumbled for my phone and dialed Mark. It rang 4 times before he picked up. What? His voice was clipped, impatient. In the background, I heard the explosion of a grenade and the chatter of teammates. He was gaming. In the middle of a workday, Mark, I am at the pharmacy, I whispered, turning my back to the line of people. The card was declined. Leo needs his asthma meds. It says insufficient funds. Do not be stupid. Layla, he snapped. I transferred the money. You probably swiped it wrong. You always panic over nothing. I swiped it twice. Mark, it says 0 balance. Did a bill go through early? I am in the middle of a raid. Layla, I cannot deal with your incompetence right now. Just use your whatever that craft money is you have. I will fix the bank error later. Click. He hung up. He did not ask about Leo. He did not ask why I was at the pharmacy. He just called me incompetent and went back to his game. I stood there, feeling the heat rise up my neck. My craft money, that was what he called the earnings from my Etsy shop. The money I made staying up until 2 in the morning, knotting intricate designs while he slept. It was my lifeline, my tiny slice of independence that I hoarded in a separate digital wallet he did not know the password to. I pulled out my personal card. It had exactly $80 on it. Try this one, I said, my voice barely audible. The transaction was approved. I grabbed the bag, avoiding Sarah's pitying gaze, and rushed out to the car. When I got home, the rain had stopped, leaving the driveway slick and black. I unbuckled Leo, who was breathing a little easier after a puff from the emergency inhaler I had kept in the glove box, and carried him inside. The hallway was blocked. A massive cardboard box sat right in the center of the foyer. It was heavy, sleek, and branded with aggressive red and black graphics. The Titan X Pro Gaming Throne, Ultimate Comfort Series. I stared at the box. I knew this brand. I had seen ads for it. This chair cost nearly $900. My hand started to shake, not from cold, but from a sudden, violent realization. The bank did not make an error. The mortgage was not due yet. I walked into the living room. Mark was coming down the stairs, wearing his headset around his neck, looking energized, the flush of a virtual victory on his cheeks. He stopped when he saw me, or rather, when he saw me looking at the box. Oh, good. FedEx came, he said casually, walking past me to inspect the package. My back has been killing me lately. I needed something ergonomic for the home office. Mark, I said, my voice steady, though my insides were screaming. The card was declined for $45 at the pharmacy. Leo could not breathe. He did not even look up from the box. He was searching for a box cutter. I told you. It is a glitch. I will call the bank tomorrow. Stop being so dramatic. You got the meds. Did you not? I used my own money. My craft money. I said. He finally looked at me. His eyes cold and flat. There was no remorse. No worry for his son. Just annoyance that I was ruining his unboxing moment. Well, good, he said, slicing the tape on the box with a sharp rip. Since you do not contribute to the mortgage or the utilities, the least you can do is buy some medicine for the kid once in a while. We are a team. Remember? Stop keeping score. He ripped the cardboard open, revealing the black leather within. Besides, he muttered, pulling out the instruction manual. I work hard. I deserve a decent place to sit. I looked at the $900 chair. Then I looked at the small, white bag in my hand containing the medicine that had almost been denied to my son. I did not scream. I did not throw the vase on the table. I just stood there, clutching the paper bag until my knuckles turned white. You are right, Mark, I said softly. You deserve it. I turned and walked up the stairs to Leo's room. But as I climbed, step by heavy step, I felt something shift inside me. It was not just sadness anymore. It was the first cold, hard seed of hatred, taking root in the pit of my stomach. The house settled into an uneasy silence after midnight. The rain had ceased, leaving behind a heavy, damp fog that pressed against the window panes like a suffocating blanket. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan slicing through the shadows. Beside me, the space where Mark should have been was empty. The cold sheets were a reminder that he was still downstairs, likely sitting in his new $900 throne, ruling over his digital kingdom while our real world crumbled. I could not sleep. The image of the card reader at the pharmacy flashing that rejection message burned behind my eyelids. Insufficient funds. It was impossible. I managed our budget with the precision of a forensic accountant. I knew every penny that came in and every penny that went out. Or at least, I thought I did. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet making no sound on the plush carpet. I needed to see the numbers. I needed to prove to myself that I was not crazy, that the bank had indeed made a mistake. I crept down the hallway to the small nook we called the family office. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed with a harsh blue light, stinging my tired eyes. I navigated to the bank portal and typed in our username. Then I typed the password. It was a combination of our anniversary and the name of the street we grew up on. I had typed it 1,000 times. Login failed. Invalid password. I frowned. My fingers must have slipped. I typed it again, slower this time, enunciating each keystroke in my mind. Login failed. A cold prickle of dread started at the base of my neck. I tried a third time. Account locked. Please contact customer service. I sat back in the chair, my breath catching in my throat. He had changed it. He had changed the password to our joint account without telling me. The account that held the money for the mortgage, the groceries, and the emergency fund we had spent 5 years building. What are you doing? The voice made me jump so hard my knee slammed against the desk. Mark was standing in the doorway. The hallway light backlit him, casting his face in shadow. He was holding a can of energy drink, the carbonation hissing softly in the quiet house. I was trying to check the bank. I stammered, my heart racing as if I were a teenager caught sneaking out. The password is not working. Mark, he took a slow sip of his drink, then walked into the room. He did not look at me. He looked at the laptop screen with a bored expression. I changed it yesterday, he said calmly. You changed it? Why? I asked, my voice rising slightly. Mark, that is our joint account. I need to see why the card was declined today. I need to know if we can pay the electric bill next week. He finally looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot from hours of gaming, but his gaze was sharp, predatory. I changed it because I got a security alert. He lied. I knew he was lying. I could feel it in the air between us. Someone tried to access the account from an unrecognized device. Probably one of those sketchy craft supply sites you visit. I had to secure our assets. Layla, I did it to protect us. Protect us? I stood up, my fear giving way to a spark of anger. You locked me out of my own money, Mark, and today, you bought a gaming chair that cost nearly $1,000 while I had to scrape together $80 for Leo's medicine. How is that protecting us? Mark set the can down on the desk with a loud clack. The boredom vanished from his face, replaced by a sneer that twisted his handsome features into something ugly. There you go again, he said, shaking his head. Always hysterical, always making things up to fit your victim narrative. I am not making it up. I saw the box in the hallway. That chair was a gift from the company. He shot back, his voice smooth and practiced. A performance bonus. I did not pay a dime for it. But you assume the worst. You assume I am stealing from my own family. I blinked. A gift? Was it possible? I felt the ground beneath me wobble. Maybe I had jumped to conclusions. Maybe I was being unfair, but the card declined. I whispered, my certainty wavering. Mark Zihil. A long, exaggerated sound of exhaustion. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. He smelled of stale sweat and artificial grape flavoring. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. The touch was gentle, but it made my skin crawl. Layla, look at you, he said softly. You are shaking. You are pale. When was the last time you slept a full 8 hours? I do not know, I admitted. You are spiraling, honey, just like after Leo was born. Remember? The mention of my postpartum depression hit me like a physical blow. Those dark months where I cried over spilled milk, where I was convinced the ceiling was going to collapse on the baby. I had fought so hard to climb out of that hole. This is not like that, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Is it not? Mark countered. You are forgetting things. You are paranoid about money. You are accusing your husband, the man who works 60 hours a week to keep a roof over your head, of financial abuse. That sounds like a relapse to me. He picked up the laptop and snapped it shut. You are tired. You are not thinking clearly. Go to bed. Layla, stop obsessing over numbers you clearly do not understand. I handle the finances because I am the one with the business degree. I am the one bringing in the paycheck. Just trust me. I looked at him, searching for the man I married, the man who used to hold my hand during thunderstorms. But that man was gone. In his place was this stranger who looked at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. I just want the password. Mark, I said, tears pricking my eyes. Please, I will give it to you when you are stable, he said, turning his back on me to leave the room. I am not going to let you drain our savings on impulse buys because you are having a manic episode. Good night. Layla. He walked away, taking the laptop with him. I stood alone in the dark office. The silence rushed back in, louder than before. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. Was he right? Was I relapsing? Had I imagined the price tag on the shipping label? Had I imagined the look on the pharmacist's face? I felt a crack form in the foundation of my mind, a hairline fracture of doubt. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was the parasite he often joked I was, sucking the life and joy out of him with my anxiety. I went back upstairs, but I did not get back into bed. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on the wet pavement. I wanted to believe him. It would be so much easier to believe that I was just sick, that my husband was a good man protecting me from myself. But as I sat there, hugging my knees to my chest, a small, stubborn voice in the back of my head whispered a single word: liar. It was the first time I had ever let myself think it, and once the thought was there, I could not unthink it. The crack was small, but it was there, and through it, the cold wind of truth was beginning to blow. 3 days had passed since the incident with the gaming chair, and an uneasy truce had settled over our home. I had spent those 72 hours in a state of performative penitence. I cooked Mark's favorite meals. I kept Leo quiet and out of sight. I swallowed my anxiety about the bank account like a bitter pill, convincing myself that perhaps Mark was right. Perhaps I was spiraling. Perhaps I was ungrateful. The mind is a treacherous thing. When you are told you are crazy for long enough, you begin to look for cracks in your own sanity rather than flaws in the person holding the mirror. It was Friday evening, and the rain had returned, drumming a relentless rhythm against the roof of our Bellevue home. Mark had retreated to his sanctuary immediately after dinner. He called it his office, but in reality, it was a fortress dedicated to his ego. He had spent thousands of dollars soundproofing the walls so that the noise of our domestic life, the washing machine, the vacuum, the sound of his son crying, would not penetrate his digital sanctuary. I was in the kitchen, squeezing fresh oranges. Mark had mentioned that morning that he felt a cold coming on, and like a dutiful nurse, I was preparing a pitcher of juice rich in vitamin C. My hands stung from the citric acid, but I focused on the task. If I could just be useful, if I could just be the perfect wife, maybe he would unlock the bank account. Maybe he would look at me with affection again instead of that cold, dead annoyance. I placed a tall glass of the bright orange liquid on a silver serving tray. I added a small plate of sliced apples, peeled exactly the way he liked. I walked up the stairs, my footsteps silent on the plush beige carpet. The house was dark, save for the ambient glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. As I approached the door to his office, I noticed something unusual. A sliver of electric blue light slashed across the dark hallway floor. The door was not fully closed. The heavy latch, usually engaged to seal him off from us, had not clicked into place. I hesitated. Mark hated to be disturbed when he was working, but I reasoned that a loving gesture, a glass of juice to boost his immunity, would be a welcome interruption. I stepped closer, intending to knock softly. That was when I heard his voice. It was not the low, monotonous tone he used when speaking to me. It was vibrant, boisterous, and dripping with an arrogant confidence I had not seen directed at me in years. "Dude, you have no idea," Mark said, his voice carrying clearly through the crack in the door. It was effortless. "She is completely clueless." I froze. My hand hovered inches from the wood. I knew I should announce myself, but a primitive instinct, a survival mechanism buried deep in my lizard brain, told me to stay quiet. I leaned in, holding my breath. "Yeah, the new celestial warlord skin," Mark continued. He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. It cost $2,500, limited edition. I had to have it to complete the set. My heart skipped a beat. $2,500. That number echoed in my head. It was the exact amount we had in the emergency savings account. The account specifically designated for Leo. The account we had started after his first severe asthma attack, terrified that we would one day be unable to afford a nebulizer or an ambulance ride. Wait, did she notice? A voice from the speakers crackled back. It was one of his gaming friends, someone he spent more time with than his own family. Please, Mark scoffed. Layla notice? She cannot even balance her own checkbook. I told her the bank made an error, and she bought it hook of line and sinker. I just moved the funds, bought the skin, and locked her out of the account. She thinks it is a security breach. The tray in my hands began to tremble. The glass rattled softly against the silver, a tiny chime of warning. I felt nausea rising in my throat, hot and acidic. He had not received a bonus. He had not been gifted the chair. And now, this. He had drained our son's medical fund for a digital costume. A collection of pixels. That is savage. Man, the other voice laughed. But what if she finds out? What if she leaves? Mark was silent for a moment. Then he let out a long, derisive sigh that chilled the marrow of my bones. Leave? Where would she go? Mark said, his tone dropping to a sneer. She has no money, no career, no friends that I have not filtered out. She is completely dependent on me. Honestly, man, she is just a parasite. The word hung in the air. Parasite. She lives in my house, eats my food, and spends her days playing with yarn while I bust my back. Mark continued, his voice gaining momentum, fueled by the invisible audience he was performing for. I realized then that he was not just talking to a friend, he was streaming. There were thousands of people watching. I am basically running a charity for a washed-up marketing girl who turned into a frantic, pill-popping housewife. She is lucky I keep her around. It is cheaper than a maid. I guess my world stopped. The hallway stretched and warped. The man speaking, my husband, the father of my child, was stripping me bare, peeling away my dignity layer by layer for the amusement of strangers on the internet. He did not see me as a partner. He did not even see me as a human being. He saw me as an organism that fed off him, a burden he tolerated solely for his own convenience. I looked down at the orange juice. I had squeezed it with love. I had worried about his health. I had questioned my own sanity to keep his peace. And all the while, he was laughing at me. My fingers went numb. The silver tray slipped from my grasp. Crash. The sound was explosive in the quiet house. The glass shattered against the hardwood floor, sending shards flying like shrapnel. The orange juice splattered across the pristine white baseboards and soaked into the hem of my pajamas, looking like a gruesome arterial spray. The laughter inside the room cut off instantly. The door was yanked open. Mark stood there, bathed in the neon purple and blue glow of his multiple monitors. He was wearing his headset around his neck. His face was a mask of shock that quickly curdled into fury. Behind him, on the massive screens, I saw the chat room scrolling frantically. Lines of text flew by, faster than I could read, but I caught words like busted, wife aggro, and oh snap. He was live. He had broadcast his confession, and now he was broadcasting my humiliation. I stood amidst the broken glass, my feet bare and vulnerable near the jagged edges. I looked up at him, I waited for the shame to hit him. I waited for him to scramble, to apologize, to turn off the camera, to check if I was hurt. He did none of those things. Mark looked down at the mess on the floor, then up at my face. His eyes were devoid of empathy. They were cold, hard stones. He looked at me with the same expression one would give a dog that had vomited on the rug. "Great," he said, his voice flat and dripping with disdain. "Look at what you did." He stepped back into the room and sat down in his $900 chair. He put his headset back on, adjusting the microphone. "Sorry about that, guys," he said to the camera, to the thousands of watchers, ignoring my trembling form in the doorway. "The parasite is making a mess again. Clumsy. Probably forgot to take her meds today. Anyway, let us get back to the raid." He reached out and pressed a button on his keyboard. The stream did not end. He simply muted his microphone. He turned to me, swiveled the chair around, and glared. "Clean it up," he hissed, the venom in his real voice even worse than his broadcast persona. "And get out. You are embarrassing me." I could not move. My breath was coming in short, sharp gasps. The realization washed over me, drowning out the shock. This was not a bad patch in our marriage. This was not stress. This was abuse. Calculated, monetized, entertaining abuse. He had stolen Leo's safety net. He had called me a parasite. And now, he was ordering me to clean up the mess of my own broken heart while he played a game. I looked at the shards of glass. One large, curved piece lay near my big toe. It reflected the blue light from his room. Something inside me, the part of Layla Vance that had been a rising star in marketing, the part that had once commanded boardrooms before she commanded a diaper bag, stirred from a long, induced coma. I did not cry. The tears I had shed for days seemed to have evaporated, replaced by a dry, scorching heat. "I heard you," I whispered. My voice was shaky, but audible. "I heard everything. Mark, nobody cares what you heard," he replied, turning back to his screens. "Close the door. You are letting the draft in." I looked at his back, the back of the man I had vowed to love and cherish. I realized then that the Mark I loved did not exist. He was a character, an avatar, a skin he wore to trap me, and the creature underneath was a monster. I stepped back, carefully avoiding the glass. I did not clean it up. For the first time in 5 years, I left a mess on the floor. "I am not a parasite," I said, though he was no longer listening. I turned and walked away, leaving the door wide open. Let the draft in. Let the cold in. Let the whole world see the rot inside this house. I walked to the guest room, my legs feeling like lead. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the blank wall. The silence of the house had changed. It was no longer peaceful. It was the heavy, pressurized silence before a bomb detonates. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could not stay. But as I thought of the empty bank account, the mortgage in his name, and the ruthless man in the other room who held all the cards, a terrifying question paralyzed me. How? How does a parasite survive when the host decides to kill it? The next morning, the broken glass and sticky orange pulp still marred the hallway floor. It was a defiant statement, a silent rebellion I had not dared to enact in years. Mark had simply walked around it, leaving it for me, the parasite, to clean, but I refused. The mess felt like a physical manifestation of our shattered marriage, and I would not be the one to sweep it under the rug anymore. I woke with a clarity that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The thick fog of self-doubt, carefully cultivated by Mark over years, had finally lifted. I was not crazy. I was not imagining things. He was a liar, a thief, and a narcissist of the highest order. The realization was a bitter pill, but swallowed with a strange sense of liberation. My perception of our perfect family life, once a meticulously constructed facade, crumbled around me like dry plaster. Leo was still asleep, oblivious to the silent war that had erupted between his parents. I dressed him quietly, my movements slow and deliberate. I knew I needed to act, but every fiber of my being was screaming in panic. Where did I even begin? Mark had locked me out financially. He controlled every aspect of our lives, from the thermostat to the grocery budget. As soon as Leo finished his breakfast, I sat him in front of his favorite cartoon in the living room. Then, armed with a desperate resolve, I found Mark. He was in the kitchen, casually scrolling on his phone, sipping coffee. He had already showered, his hair still damp, radiating an infuriating calm. He glanced at the orange juice stain and then at me, his eyes devoid of any recognition of the previous night's devastation. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. He said, not looking up from his phone, "Can it wait? I have a busy day of gaming ahead of me." "No, it cannot wait," I insisted, taking a deep breath. "I want access to our joint account, and I want to know why you spent our son's emergency medical fund on a video game costume." He finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were cold, distant, like the surface of a frozen lake. He did not deny it. He did not apologize, because it is my money. "Layla," he said, enunciating each word slowly, as if speaking to a dull-witted child. "I earn it. I decide how to spend it. You contribute nothing of value to this household. I am raising our son. I manage the house. I support your career," I countered, my voice cracking with indignation. "Do you know how many hours I spend making things for that Etsy shop, just to have a few dollars that are not tied to your approval?" He scoffed, a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Your little craft hobby? That barely covers your coffee habit. You think that gives you a say in how I manage thousands of dollars? This is not just about money. Mark, you called me a parasite on a live stream in front of thousands of people. What kind of husband does that?" His eyes narrowed. The charming mask he often wore for public consumption completely fell away. A husband who is tired of being taken advantage of by a lazy, dependent woman who hides behind postpartum depression when she does not want to work. The words hit me like a slap. He had weaponized my vulnerability, my struggle with postpartum depression, using it to dismiss my anger, to invalidate my very sanity. My face burned, my chest tightened. "I want a divorce," I whispered. The words, once so terrifying, now tasted like freedom, albeit a terrifying one. Mark's lip curled into a cruel smile. "You want a divorce? Be my guest, but do not come crying to me when you have nowhere to go. You have no job, no savings, no credit history to your name. Thanks to my careful management." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "And who do you think a family court judge will believe? The stable, employed father, or the stay-at-home mother with a history of mental health issues and a hobby that barely generates enough income to buy groceries?" The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He knew my deepest fear, losing Leo. He knew how easily he could paint me as unstable, unfit, My carefully constructed resolve began to fray. My mother will help me, I said, grasping at straws. My mom lived 3 states away, but she was always there for me. Mark let out a humorless laugh. Brenda, you think my mother will side with you? Brenda believes I walk on water. Layla, she thinks you are the reason I am stressed and have to escape into my games. She will tell you to go home and make me a sandwich. And he was right. My mother-in-law, Brenda Vance, was a force of nature, a woman who believed her son could do no wrong, no matter how egregious his behavior. Brenda had been the original architect of Mark's entitlement, showering him with praise and excusing every misstep. Later that morning, in a moment of desperate delusion, I called her. My voice was tight with suppressed tears as I recounted Mark's public humiliation, the stolen funds, his callous words. Brenda, he called me a parasite. He took Leo's money for a game. I pleaded, hoping to appeal to her maternal instinct for her grandchild. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, Brenda's voice, sharp and dismissive, cut through the phone. Layla, honestly, what did you expect? Mark works tirelessly to provide for you and Leo. He needs his downtime. Men need their outlets. And you just sit at home all day. Her tone hardened. Perhaps if you were more engaging, he would not need to escape so much. You never were much good at keeping him happy, were you? And that Etsy nonsense. Honestly, darling, it is embarrassing. Focus on being a wife and mother, and perhaps your husband would not need to spend his money on silly games. My hand tightened around the phone. She had not only dismissed my pain, but had expertly pivoted the blame back onto me. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, learned directly from the master himself. But the money for Leo's medicine, I tried, my voice barely a whisper. Oh, for heaven's sake, Layla, he earned that money. If you need a few dollars for Leo's pills, just ask him nicely. Do not make a drama out of everything. You always were so sensitive. Now, I have to go. Mark is coming over for lunch. I am making his favorite pot roast. You should really try to cook more for him. Layla, it would do wonders for your marriage. She hung up before I could respond. I stood in the silent kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear. The cold silence of the dial tone hummed against my eardrum, a stark reminder of my utter isolation. My last hope for an ally had vanished, replaced by the same toxic narrative Mark had spun for years. He had painted me into a corner, no money, no support, and a looming threat to my most precious possession, my son. The walls of this house, once a symbol of my domestic bliss, now felt like the padded cells of an asylum. Every word, every accusation, every dismissive glance had chipped away at my self-worth, making me doubt my memories, my feelings, my very perception of reality. I walked to the living room, past the uncleaned orange juice stain, a monument to my fleeting rebellion. Leo was engrossed in his cartoon, his small face illuminated by the bright colors on the screen. He was safe for now, but for how long? I looked out the window at the perfectly manicured lawns of our suburban neighborhood. The pristine facades hid stories of quiet desperation, of lives lived in fear, of women like me who were slowly being erased by men like Mark. My freedom, my sanity, my son, all were held hostage by a man who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience, a parasite. And as the last sliver of naive hope died within me, a new, colder thought took root. If he was going to treat me like a parasite, then perhaps it was time I started acting like one. The next morning, I woke up feeling as though my head were filled with wet cement. My limbs were heavy, laden, and unresponsive. It was a sensation I had not felt in years. A thick, chemical fog that coated my thoughts and made the simple act of blinking feel like a strenuous workout. I sat up, the room spinning lazily around me. My mouth tasted of copper and stale sleep. I stumbled into the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. I looked into the mirror. My pupils were dilated, my skin pale and waxy. Panic flared in my chest. I knew this feeling. It was the ghost of a past I thought I had buried. I hurried back to the bedroom and grabbed my purse from the dresser. My hands shook violently as I dumped the contents onto the duvet. Keys, wallet, a crumpled receipt, a half-eaten pack of crackers for Leo. And there, rolling innocently across the white sheet, was an orange prescription bottle. I stared at it. The label bore my name, Layla Vance, and the medication name, diazepam. My breath hitched. I had flushed my last prescription down the toilet 3 years ago. I had fought through the withdrawal, the sleepless nights, the anxiety attacks, all to be clean for Leo. I had not touched a sedative since. Looking for these, Mark was leaning against the doorframe. He was dressed for work, wearing a crisp blue button-down shirt that made his eyes look deceptively kind. He held a second bottle in his hand. Where did these come from? I rasped, my voice thick. I did not buy these. I did not take these. Mark walked into the room, his expression one of profound disappointment. It was the look a parent gives a child who has been caught stealing candy. I found them in your nightstand. Layla, he said softly, shaking the bottle. The pills rattled, a dry, accusing sound. And I found one pill missing from the bottle in your purse. I heard you moving around last night, stumbling. You were slurring your words. That is a lie, I screamed. Or I tried to scream, but it came out as a weak croak. You put them there. You drugged me. Mark sighed and shook his head. He pulled a cell phone from his pocket. Not his, but an old one we used for emergencies. I was afraid of this. He said, I recorded you last night. You were incoherent. Layla, you were talking about how you could not handle the stress anymore, about how Leo was too much for you. Show me, I demanded, reaching for the phone. Show me the video. He pulled it back out of my reach. I cannot let you delete the evidence. Layla, this is for your own good. He took a step closer, towering over me as I sat on the edge of the bed. The air in the room grew cold. I spoke to a contact of mine this morning, Mark said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She works for Child Protective Services. I asked her, hypothetically, what happens when a mother relapses? What happens when a mother with a history of severe postpartum depression starts self-medicating and becomes a danger to her child? The blood drained from my face. The room stopped spinning and tilted sharply on its axis. You would not, I whispered. Mark, please. Leo is my life. Then why are you endangering him? Mark snapped, his facade of kindness vanishing. If I file a report, Layla, they will take him. They will see the pills in your bag. They will see your erratic behavior. They will hear my testimony about your financial paranoia and your emotional instability. You will lose custody. You will lose visitation. You will never see our son grow up. I felt small. I felt microscopic. He had anticipated every move. He had planted the evidence, drugged my tea or water, and now he held the nuclear codes to my entire existence. "What do you want?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "I will do anything. Please, do not call them. Do not take Leo." Mark smiled. It was a terrifying, victorious smile. He sat down next to me and draped an arm around my trembling shoulders. "I do not want to take Leo away," he cooed, stroking my hair. "I just want my wife back. I want the Layla who supports me. The Layla who does not nag about money or make up crazy stories about me stealing. I want peace. Layla, can you give me peace?" I nodded frantically. Yes, I promise. I will stop asking about the bank account. I will clean the house. I will be quiet. Good girl," he whispered, kissing my forehead. "You stay home today. Rest. Let the drugs leave your system. If you behave, I will forget about the call to Child Protective Services. But Layla, one more slip up, one more accusation, and I make that call. Do you understand?" "I understand," I sobbed. He stood up, adjusted his cuffs, and walked out of the room. I heard his heavy footsteps go down the stairs, the front door open and close, and the engine of his car start up. I was alone. I curled into a ball on the bed, clutching the duvet to my chest. I felt violated. I felt defeated. The fight had been crushed out of me before it had even truly begun. He was too smart, too cruel, too powerful. I was just a parasite, exactly as he said. A weak, dependent creature who could not even protect herself. I lay there for hours, staring at the gray light filtering through the window. The rain had started again, tapping against the glass like 1,000 tiny fingers asking to be let in. Around noon, a sound pierced the silence. Ding. It was a notification from my laptop, which sat on the vanity table. I ignored it. I did not want to look at a screen. I did not want to exist. Ding. Another one. I dragged myself off the bed. My legs were still unsteady. I walked over to the laptop and opened the lid. I had an email in my personal inbox. The sender was unknown. The name simply read, Watcher 01. My heart gave a strange, erratic thump. I did not know anyone by that handle. I hovered the cursor over the delete button, assuming it was spam or a promotional email for yarn supplies. But then I saw the subject line. Subject, the truth about Mark Vance. Do not delete. My finger froze. A cold shiver raced down my spine, dispelling the last of the drug-induced haze. I looked at the door, paranoid that Mark might burst in, even though I knew he was at work. I clicked open the email. There was no text in the body of the email, just a single attachment, a video file, and a short line of text underneath it. He thinks he is a king. Show the world he is a jester. I stared at the screen. My breath came in shallow gasps. This was it. This was the lifeline I had been praying for. Or perhaps the final nail in my coffin. I moved the mouse. I clicked on the attachment. The video player opened. The loading circle spun for a second, then disappeared. The screen filled with the image of my husband's office. I saw Mark, our laughing, his headset on, and then I heard his voice, clear and undistorted, saying things that would change the trajectory of my life forever. I leaned in closer, my eyes wide, my fear slowly transforming into a cold, hard rage. The point of no return had arrived. I was not going back. I pressed play. The video player expanded to fill the screen, pixelated at first, before sharpening into high definition. It was the same angle I had seen before. the view from Mark's webcam, but the timestamp in the corner indicated this was recorded 20 minutes after I had left the room with my tray of shattered glass and dignity. Mark was leaning back in his chair, the headset still around his neck, but the microphone boom pulled up. He was holding a cell phone to his ear, his face flushed with the adrenaline of his game and something else. Something more malicious. Yeah. Mom, she is gone, Mark said into the phone. He took a swig of energy drink. No, she did not suspect a thing. I told you. Layla is not built for strategy. She is emotional. She reacts. I leaned closer to the laptop screen, my breath catching in my throat. He was talking to Brenda. I transferred the bonus. Mark continued, his voice dropping an octave. Conspiratorial and smug. $50,000. It hit your account this morning. Just keep it in the separate trust like we discussed. Do not touch it. $50,000. The number echoed in the silent bedroom like a gunshot. It was not just a few thousand for a gaming chair. It was $50,000. A down payment on a house. A college fund for Leo. Years of security. I know. Mark laughed, spinning a pen between his fingers. The lawyer said as long as the funds are moved before the filing date, and as long as I can prove the debt is marital, but the assets are familial gifts to you, she will walk away with nothing. I will claim the debt on the credit cards as ours, but the cash is yours. She will be lucky if she does not end up paying me alimony. He paused, listening to his mother on the other end. Don't worry about Leo, he said, and his tone turned chillingly flat. I will get full custody. I have already planted the seeds about her mental health, the postpartum depression history, the relapse I am orchestrating. No judge in Washington state will give a child to an unemployed, pill-popping addict. She will be back in her mother's trailer park within a month. Mark hung up the phone. He looked directly into the camera lens, checking his reflection. He smoothed his hair, winked at himself, and muttered 2 words that severed the last thread of love I held for him. Checkmate. Bitch. The video ended. I sat there in the gray light of the afternoon, the silence of the house pressing against my ears. I waited for the tears. I waited for the crushing weight of despair that usually followed his cruelty. But it did not come. Instead, a strange, cold clarity washed over me. It started in my chest, a cooling of the blood, and spread to my fingertips. The drug-induced fog that Mark had tried to drown me in evaporated under the scorching heat of absolute truth. He was not just a bad husband. He was an enemy combatant. He had been planning this for months, maybe years, while I was clipping coupons and knitting until my fingers bled to buy groceries. He was funneling our life savings to his mother, while I was worrying about being a good wife. He was consulting lawyers on how to frame me as an unfit mother. I looked at my hands. They were steady now. The trembling was gone. I closed the laptop. I did not delete the email. I forwarded it to a new, encrypted email address I had created years ago and never used. Then I downloaded the file to a USB drive I kept hidden in the bottom of my sewing kit, a place Mark would never look because it contained women's work. I stood up. I walked to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked different. Her eyes were red-rimmed, yes, but the pupils were sharp. The soft, pleading look was gone. Get up, I whispered to my reflection. Stop crying. Crying is what he wants. Crying proves you are unstable. I washed my face with ice-cold water. I brushed my hair until it shone. I put on a touch of concealer to hide the dark circles. and a swipe of pale pink lipstick. I put on the dress Mark liked, the blue one that he said made me look classy. I went downstairs. I cleaned the kitchen until it sparkled. I took a roast out of the freezer, his favorite, and began to season it with rosemary and garlic. I set the table. I lit a candle when I heard the garage door open at 6 o'clock. My heart did not race with fear. It beat with the slow, rhythmic thud of a war drum. Mark walked in, expecting a wreck. He expected to find me in bed, weeping, or passed out from the sedatives he thought I had taken. He expected chaos. Instead, he found a domestic idyll. The house smelled of roasted meat and sage. Leo was sitting at the table, coloring quietly. I was standing by the oven, wearing an apron, a glass of wine in my hand. He stopped in the doorway, his briefcase halfway to the floor. Suspicion narrowed his eyes. "What is this?" he asked. I turned to him and smiled. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "I am sorry, Mark," I said, my voice soft and trembling, just enough to sound submissive. "I thought about what you said. You were right. I was spiraling. I found the pill bottle. I must have taken one and forgotten. I was so scared I was losing my mind again." Mark stared at me, analyzing my micro-expressions. He was looking for the lie, but I gave him exactly what his ego craved. I gave him victory. "I do not want to lose you," I continued. Walking over to him, I placed a hand on his chest. I felt his heart beating, the heart of a monster, and I definitely do not want to lose Leo. "I will do better. I will stop asking questions. You handle the money. You are the smart one. I will focus on being a good wife." The tension in his shoulders dropped. A slow, arrogant smile spread across his face. He believed it. Of course he believed it. In his world, he was the sun, and I was just a satellite that had briefly drifted out of orbit. "I am glad you finally came to your senses, Layla," he said, patting my cheek. It was a patronizing tap, dismissive and ownership-claiming. "I did not want to make that call to the authorities, but you have to know your place." "I know," I whispered. "I know my place now." We ate dinner. I listened to him complain about his coworkers. I nodded. I poured him wine. I watched him eat the food I prepared, thinking about how easy it would be to slip those pills into his glass, just as he had done to me. But that would be too easy. That would be messy. I did not want revenge. I wanted justice, and justice required evidence. That night, Mark was in a particularly good mood. He drank 3 glasses of heavy red wine and went to bed early, satisfied that his kingdom was once again under control. I lay beside him, listening to his breathing deepen into a snore. I waited. 1 hour, 2 hours. The clock on the bedside table read 2 o'clock in the morning. I slid out from under the covers. I tiptoed out of the room, moving like a ghost in my own house. I went downstairs to his office. The door was closed. I turned the handle. Locked, of course, but I knew where the key was. He kept a spare inside the hollow base of the trophy he had won at a regional gaming tournament 3 years ago, which sat on the bookshelf in the hallway. He thought he was so clever, hiding it in plain sight, a trophy celebrating his glory. I retrieved the key. I opened the door. The room smelled of stale air and electronics. I sat in his chair, the $900 throne. I woke up his computer. Password. He had changed the bank password, but he had not changed his computer login. He was too arrogant for that. He assumed I was too technologically illiterate to even know how to turn on his custom-built rig. I typed in God Mode 88. The screen unlocked. My hands flew across the keyboard. I did not look at the games. I went straight to the folder labeled Tax Docs. Empty. I checked the recycling bin. Empty. He was smarter than that. I searched the hard drive for recent files. Nothing. Then I remembered the video. He had mentioned a trust. I opened his browser. He had cleared the history, but he had not cleared the autofill data on the login forms. I clicked on the user field for the bank website. A drop-down menu appeared. There was his main account, and there, underneath it, was a username I did not recognize. Brenda V. Trust, admin. I felt a surge of triumph. I took my phone out and snapped a photo of the screen. I could not log in without the password, but I had the username. I had the bank name. I spent the next hour combing through his email. He had been careless there, in the trash folder. I found the confirmation of the transfer. Wire transfer initiated. $50,000 to be. Vance, Revocable Trust. I forwarded the email to my secret account. Then I permanently deleted it from his trash. I found chat logs with his gaming friends, where he bragged about hiding the loot from the wife aggro. I screenshotted everything. Every insult. Every admission of financial fraud. Every threat to take my son. By the time I finished, it was 4 o'clock in the morning. My eyes were burning, but my soul felt forged in steel. I had enough. I had the smoking gun. I shut down the computer. I locked the door. I returned the key to the trophy base. I crept back into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin. Mark grunted in his sleep and rolled over, flinging a heavy arm across my waist. It felt like a chain. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with the next steps. I needed a lawyer, a shark, someone who ate men like Mark for breakfast, and I needed money to pay them. I thought about the engagement ring on my finger. It was a vintage diamond, an heirloom from his grandmother. He always bragged about how much it was worth. Tomorrow, I would find out. Mark Vance thought he had broken me. He thought he was sleeping next to a parasite. He was wrong. He was sleeping next to a mirror. And when he finally looked at me, really looked at me, he was going to see the monster he had created staring right back. The Emerald Lake Country Club was the kind of place that smelled of old money, lemon polish, and quiet desperation. It was the perfect venue for Brenda Vance's 60th birthday party. The ballroom was draped in gold and cream silk, with crystal chandeliers casting a fractured, glittering light over the 60 or so guests gathered below. Outside, the Seattle rain battered against the floor-to-ceiling windows. But inside, the climate was controlled, hermetically sealed against the storm. Much like the lies that held my marriage together, I stood near the entrance, smoothing the fabric of my dress. It was a deep emerald green velvet, a color that Mark had once said made me look regal. Tonight, I did not wear it for him. I wore it because it was armor. It was heavy, dark, and impenetrable. Smile, Layla. Mark hissed in my ear, his hand gripping my elbow with just enough pressure to bruise. My district manager, Mrs. Sterling, is over by the bar. Do not embarrass me. You look like you are at a funeral. I turned to him and offered a wide, porcelain smile. It did not reach my eyes, but Mark never looked at my eyes anymore. I am just nervous. Mark, I said, my voice soft and breathless. I want everything to be perfect for your mother. He relaxed slightly, his chest puffing out. He adjusted his silk tie in the reflection of a glass cabinet. Just stick to the script. You are the grateful wife. I am the provider. And if anyone asks, you are feeling much better after your little episode last week. Of course, I whispered. We walked into the room. Brenda was holding court at the head table, seated on a high-backed chair that looked suspiciously like a throne. She was wearing a silver sequined gown that was perhaps a bit too young for her, and she was laughing loudly at a joke made by one of her bridge club friends. When she saw us, her eyes flicked over me with a familiar mix of assessment and dismissal before landing on her son with adoration. "Mark," she cried out, extending her hands. "My golden boy." Mark left my side and went to her, kissing her on both cheeks. I stood a few feet back, clutching my clutch purse. Inside, it was not lipstick or a compact, but my phone, fully charged and set to do not disturb, and a small HDMI adapter cable. "Happy birthday, Brenda," I said politely. She barely glanced at me. "Oh, Layla, you made it. I was not sure if you would be up for a social gathering, given your condition." Several guests nearby turned to look. I saw pity in their eyes. The unstable wife, the burden. "I wouldn't miss it," I said. The evening progressed with agonizing slowness. I sat at the table, picking at my salmon, while Mark worked the room. He was in his element. He charmed his colleagues, laughed at his boss's dry jokes, and played the role of the doting son to perfection. I watched him with a detachment that frightened me. He was not a person. He was a performance. Mrs. Sterling, a formidable woman with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, sat across from us. "Mark tells me you are a homemaker." "Layla," she said, cutting her steak with precision. "He says you have had a rough time lately." Mark interjected before I could speak, placing a protective hand over mine on the table. "Layla is fragile, Eleanor, but she is trying. I try to take as much off her plate as I can. The finances, the decision-making. It is too much stress for her." Mrs. Sterling looked at his hand on mine, then at my face. "Is that so?" I looked at Mark. He was smiling at me, a warning in his eyes. "Play the part. Mark takes care of everything," I said, my voice steady. "He is very thorough." Dessert was served, a tiered chocolate cake that cost more than my first car. It was time for the speeches. Mark stood up, tapping a spoon against his champagne flute. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to him. He looked handsome, successful, and utterly in control. "Adventurous," Mark began, his voice booming with practiced charisma. "Friends, family, colleagues, we are gathered here to celebrate the woman who made me who I am today." There was a round of applause. Brenda beamed, dabbing at a dry eye. "My mother taught me the value of hard work," Mark continued. "She taught me that you protect family at all costs. She sacrificed everything for me, and now it is my turn to give back." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a velvet envelope. "Mom, I know you have always wanted to retire to that villa in Arizona. Well, thanks to a very successful year and a lot of hard work, I have started a trust fund for you. Consider this the down payment on your dream." The room gasped. Brenda shrieked with delight, grasping the envelope. Guests whispered to one another about what a good son he was. What a provider. My stomach churned. That was Leo's money. That was the asthma medicine. That was the college fund. That was my blood and sweat, wrapped in velvet and handed over to a woman who had spent years telling me I wasn't good enough. Mark looked around the room, soaking up the adulation. His eyes landed on me, smug and triumphant. See, his look said, I can do anything, and you can do nothing. Does anyone else have a few words? Mark asked, confident that no one would dare follow his act. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the parquet floor. Mark's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned, tight and strained. Layla, he said, his tone warning, you do not have to. You look tired. Insist, I said, projecting my voice so it carried to the back of the room. I have prepared a special tribute for Brenda, and for you, Mark. I walked toward the small stage where a large projection screen had been set up for a slideshow of baby photos. The audio-visual technician, a young man in a hoodie, looked at me in confusion. I just need to plug in, I whispered to him, holding out my phone and the adapter. It is a surprise video montage. He shrugged and handed me the high-definition multimedia interface cable. I plugged it in. The screen flickered. The image of Brenda as a baby disappeared, replaced by the black background of my phone's media player. I turned to face the crowd. Mark was starting to stand up. Sensing something was wrong, his eyes were darting between me and the screen. Sit down, Mark, I said, smiling. This is my gift to the family. I pressed play. The sound system in the ballroom was excellent. High fidelity, surround sound. Vợ tao nó chỉ là một con ký sinh trùng, which means parasite. Mark's voice, amplified to a deafening volume, boomed through the country club. The room went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. The waiters froze. On the massive screen, clear as day, was Mark. He was sitting in his gaming chair, laughing. I feed her, I give her a roof, and she just breathes and spends my money on trash. Mark froze. He looked like he had been struck by lightning, his face drained of all color, leaving him a ghostly gray. In the video, he laughed again. She is lucky I keep her around. It is cheaper than a maid. I guess. A collective gasp swept through the room. I saw Mrs. Sterling's jaw drop. She looked from the screen to Mark, her expression shifting from confusion to absolute disgust. Mark lunged toward the stage. Turn it off. Technical difficulties. Turn it off. But I stood in front of the console, and the video was not done. The screen cut to black, and then the audio from the phone call played. The timestamp was clearly visible. 10 days ago. Yeah, Mom, she is gone. No, she did not suspect a thing. Brenda, who had been clutching her velvet envelope, went rigid. Her own name hung in the air, implicating her. I transferred the bonus, $50,000. It hit your account this morning. Just keep it in the separate trust like we discussed. Hide it from her. The guests turned to look at Brenda. She shrank back in her throne, the envelope suddenly looking like a radioactive isotope in her hands. She will be lucky if she does not end up paying Emmy alimony. Mark reached the stage. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to draw blood. What the hell are you doing? He screamed, forgetting the audience, forgetting the act. You crazy bitch. Turn it off. I did not flinch. I looked him dead in the eye. The video continued to play behind me. A loop of his cruelty. I have already planted the seeds about her mental health. No judge will give a child to an unemployed, pill-popping addict. The room was in chaos. People were standing up. Whispers turned into shouts. Mark Vance. The voice cut through the noise like a whip. It was Mrs. Sterling. She was standing up, her napkin thrown onto the table. She was not looking at the screen. She was looking at her district manager. Mark released my arm, spinning around to face her. Eleanor, wait, it is a deep fake. It is artificial intelligence. She made it up. She is sick. That sounded very real to me. Mark, Mrs. Sterling said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. And did you just say you transferred a $50,000 bonus? The company did not issue bonuses this quarter. Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was trapped, caught between his lies to me, his lies to his mother, and his lies to his employer, that is embezzlement. Mark, Mrs. Sterling said, loud enough for everyone to hear, we will be having a forensic audit on Monday morning. Do not bother coming in. Mark staggered back. He looked at Brenda for help, but his mother was busy trying to stuff the velvet envelope into her purse. Looking everywhere but at him, I stepped away from the console. The video had finished. The screen was black again. I walked over to the microphone stand. My hands were steady. My heart was beating a slow, powerful rhythm. Happy 60th birthday, Brenda, I said. My voice was calm, contrasting sharply with the hysteria rising in the room. I looked at Mark. He was a ruin of a man, sweating, shaking, his eyes wild with panic. The golden boy had turned into dirt. And Mark, I said, I am not a parasite. I am the host, and I am finally evicting you. I unplugged my phone. I walked off the stage. The crowd parted from me like the Red Sea. I saw shock, awe, and fear in their faces. I walked past Mrs. Sterling, who gave me a curt, respectful nod. I walked past Brenda, who was hissing at a waiter to get her more wine. I walked past Mark. He reached out a hand, as if to grab me again, but he stopped. He saw something in my eyes that he had never seen before. He saw the end. I walked out of the ballroom, through the double doors, and into the lobby. The air was cool and fresh. Behind me, I heard the explosion of voices as the shock wore off and the judgment began. I heard Mark shouting, blaming me, blaming the world. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the country club and stepped out into the night. The rain was still falling, cold and sharp against my skin. But for the first time in 5 years, I did not feel the chill. I walked to my car. The old sedan Mark let me drive because the SUV was too nice for me. I got in. I locked the doors. I looked at my phone. I had 3 missed calls from Mark already. I blocked the number. Then I dialed a number I had memorized from a billboard 3 days ago. Hello. A woman's voice answered. Bellingham and Associates. Family Law. Hello. I said, my name is Layla Vance. I have evidence of financial fraud, spousal abuse, and conspiracy to conceal assets, and I want to file for immediate sole custody of my son. We can help you with that, Mrs. Vance. The lawyer said, thank you. I said, I put the car in gear and drove away. I left the country club, the husband, the mother-in-law, and the life of a parasite behind me in the rearview mirror, shrinking until they were nothing but a speck of light in the darkness. I watched Mark in the rearview mirror as I peeled out of the country club parking lot. He was running after the car, his expensive suit soaked instantly by the relentless Seattle downpour. He looked small, frantic, and pathetic, a stark contrast to the titan of industry he pretended to be. His mouth was open in a scream I could not hear through the glass, his arms flailing as he slipped on the wet asphalt and went down on one knee. For a split second, A reflex born of 10 years of conditioning flared in my chest. The urge to stop, the urge to help him up, the urge to apologize for his clumsiness. But I killed that reflex cold. I kept my foot on the accelerator, merging onto the dark highway, putting miles of rain-slicked concrete between us. I drove to a motel 3 towns over. It was not luxurious. The neon sign buzzed with a dying electrical hum, and the carpet smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon cleaner. But it was affordable, and more importantly, it was anonymous. I carried a sleeping Leo inside, laid him on the bed, and double-locked the door. I sat in the single armchair by the window and turned on my phone. The world had moved faster than I could have imagined. The guests at the party, the same people who had sipped champagne with Mark an hour ago, had not just watched the spectacle, they had broadcast it. My notification feed was a blur of activity. A video titled, "Husband Called Wife Parasite, Then Gets Destroyed at Birthday Party" was already trending on Twitter and climbing the front page of Reddit. I clicked on it. The footage was shaky, filmed from a cell phone at table 4. It showed me standing on the stage, calm and collected, while Mark's voice boomed his hateful confession over the speakers. Then it showed the aftermath. Mark screaming, Mrs. Sterling firing him in front of the elite of Bellevue, and Brenda clutching her purse like a thief. The comments section was a bloodbath. This guy is a monster who steals medical money from their own kid. I used to work with this jerk. He is exactly as entitled as he sounds. Does anyone know where he works? Let us make sure he never gets hired again. It was a digital lynching. The court of public opinion does not require due process, and it does not grant appeals. They had heard the tapes, they had seen his face, and they had delivered their verdict. I set the phone down. I did not feel happy. I did not feel the rush of victory I thought I would. I just felt a deep, exhausting relief that the truth was finally out of my hands and into the world. I was no longer the crazy wife. I was the witness. By the next morning, the fallout had transitioned from social media gossip to real-world consequences. I received an email from my lawyer, copying me on the correspondence sent to Mark. She informed me that Mark had been terminated from his position at the logistics firm, effective immediately. The company had issued a public statement on their LinkedIn page at 8 o'clock in the morning, distancing themselves from his values and citing a zero-tolerance policy for embezzlement and reputational damage. Mark Vance was now unemployed. The 6-figure salary he used to bludgeon me into submission was gone, but the destruction did not stop there. The internet detectives, the collective hive mind that had latched onto my story, had done their work. They had found Brenda. My lawyer called me around noon. Her voice was professional, but I could hear a hint of grim satisfaction. "Layla, I just received word from opposing counsel," she said. "Mark is trying to file an emergency motion to freeze the assets, claiming you hacked him, but he has bigger problems. The Internal Revenue Service has flagged the transfer to his mother." "The $50,000? I asked, watching Leo eat his cereal at the small motel table. "Yes. It turns out Brenda never declared that trust fund. And since Mark is now being investigated for corporate embezzlement by his former employer, every penny he moved is under a microscope. They have frozen Brenda's accounts pending an audit. She cannot access the money. She cannot even pay her bridge club fees." I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the wall. Brenda, who had enabled him. Brenda, who had told me to cook more pot roast while her son called me a parasite. She was now facing the full weight of the federal government because of her greed. Mark tried to call me. My phone blocked 42 calls in the span of 3 hours. He sent texts from random numbers. You ruined everything. I am going to sue you. Pick up the phone. Layla, we can fix this. Mom is in the hospital. She had a panic attack. Are you happy now? I read the messages with a detachment that surprised me. A week ago, the news of Brenda in the hospital would have sent me rushing to her side, guilt gnawing at my gut. Now, I saw it for what it was. Another manipulation tactic. Another attempt to make me responsible for the consequences of their actions. I typed a single reply to the last number he used. Contact my lawyer. Then I turned off the phone. I looked at Leo. He was laughing at a cartoon, blissfully unaware that his father's empire had crumbled to dust in less than 24 hours. We went for a walk in the rain. I wore my hood up, not wanting to be recognized. Though I knew my face was nowhere near as famous as Mark's, I walked past a newsstand. The local paper had a small blurb on the front page about a local executive involved in viral embezzlement scandal. It was strange to see the destruction of a life printed in black and white ink. It felt final. Mark had spent years building a fortress of lies. He had soundproofed the walls to keep me out. He had encrypted the files to keep me blind. He had turned the world against me to keep me isolated. But he had forgotten the most basic rule of structural engineering. If the foundation is rotten, the higher you build, the harder you fall. I bought a coffee with cash, my craft money that he had mocked. It tasted better than any expensive latte Mark had ever bought me. As I walked back to the motel, I saw a reflection in a shop window, a woman in a raincoat, holding a child's hand. She looked tired. She looked worn, but she was standing straight. The parasite had detached itself, and the host was dying without it. The hallways of the King County Superior Court smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. It was a sterile, unforgiving environment designed to dismantle lives and divide them into piles of paperwork. I sat on a hard wooden bench, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from trembling. I was not afraid of Mark anymore, but I was terrified of the process. I was terrified of having the most intimate details of my failure as a wife dissected by strangers in black robes. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Sarah who wore her ambition like a second skin, sat beside me. She was scrolling through her tablet, confident and unbothered. To her, this was just another Tuesday. To me, it was the funeral of the last 10 years of my life. He is here, Sarah whispered, nodding toward the elevators. I looked up. Mark walked down the corridor. He was alone. His high-priced legal team, the sharks he had threatened me with, were nowhere to be seen. He could no longer afford them. Instead, he was accompanied by a court-appointed mediator who looked overworked and indifferent. Mark looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 20 days. His suit, usually tailored to perfection, hung loosely on his frame. His hair was unkempt, lacking the expensive product he used to obsess over. But it was his eyes that shook me. The arrogance was gone. The cruelty was gone. They were just empty, rimmed with red, darting around the hallway as if looking for an exit that did not exist. When he saw me, he stopped. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to beg, perhaps to blame, but his mediator nudged him forward. He walked past me, his gaze dropping to the floor. The scent of him, once a mix of expensive cologne and confidence, was now replaced by the sour odor of sweat and despair. The hearing was a blur of legalese and humiliation. I sat in the witness box and told my story. I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply stated the facts. I spoke of the locked bank accounts. I spoke of the insults. I spoke of the missing asthma medication. I presented the video, the emails, and the bank transfer records. Mark tried to speak. He tried to paint himself as a stressed provider, a man pushed to the brink by a nagging wife. He tried to claim the Parasite comment was just a joke, a bit of gamer talk taken out of context. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, was not amused. She watched the video of him mocking me. She looked at the forensic accounting of the stolen $50,000. She looked at the report from Child Protective Services, which had cleared me of all his fabricated allegations and instead flagged him as a risk due to his emotional instability. The gavel came down with a sound that echoed in the hollows of my chest. Sole, legal, and physical custody of Leo was awarded to me. Mark was granted supervised visitation, 2 hours a week, at a state-approved center. The financial ruling was even more severe. Since Mark had attempted to hide assets, the judge invoked a penalty clause. I was awarded 70% of the remaining marital assets. However, 70% of nothing is still nothing. The audit had revealed that Mark was drowning in credit card debt I knew nothing about. The house had to be sold to pay back the company he had embezzled from. The car was repossessed. We walked out of the courtroom an hour later. It was over. I had won. I had stripped him of his power, his money, and his control. But as I stood on the courthouse steps, watching the rain wash away the grime of the city, I did not feel like a winner. Layla, a voice croaked behind me. I turned. Mark stood in the doorway of the courthouse. He looked pathetic. He looked like a child who had broken his favorite toy and could not understand why he could not fix it. I can fix this, he stammered, rain dripping from his nose. I can get a new job. We can start over. Leo needs a father. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in a long time, without the filter of fear or love. I saw a stranger. I saw a small, sad man who had built his entire identity on crushing someone else. Leo has a father, I said, my voice flat and hollow. But he does not need a bully. I loved you, he whispered, his voice cracking. I did everything for us. No, Mark, I replied, you loved owning me. There is a difference. I turned my back on him. I expected to feel lighter. I expected the clouds to part and the sun to shine, but the weight in my chest remained. It was a heavy, dull ache. I realized then that victory in a divorce is a myth. There are no winners here. There are only survivors walking away from the wreckage. I had my son. I had my freedom. But I also had the memories of a decade wasted on a lie. I had the scars of insults that would echo in my head late at night for years to come. I walked to my beat-up car, my heels clicking on the wet pavement. I was free. Yes, but the cost of that freedom had been my innocence, my trust, and my heart. The war was over, but the landscape of my soul was scorched earth. I got into the car and locked the door. I watched Mark standing in the rain, shrinking in the distance as I drove away. He was a ghost now, but ghosts have a way of haunting you long after they are gone. The studio apartment smelled of boiled cabbage and lemon polish, a scent that seemed permanently etched into the peeling wallpaper. It was on the 4th floor of a walk-up building in a part of town Mark would have refused to drive through, let alone live in. The streetlights outside buzzed with a chaotic energy, and the sound of a siren wailed in the distance, closer and louder than it ever would have been in our gated community in Bellevue. I sat at the small, a wobbly kitchen table I had bought from a thrift store for $15. The surface was scratched, the varnish worn away in patches that looked like islands on a map. It was imperfect, it was cheap, and it was mine. In the corner of the room, separated only by a hanging sheet I had rigged up for privacy, Leo was sleeping on a mattress on the floor. His breathing was the only steady rhythm in my life. He did not have a custom-painted mural of the galaxy on his ceiling anymore. He did not have a playroom filled with educational toys. But tonight, for the first time in months, he had fallen asleep without asking why Daddy was yelling. I looked down at my hands, resting on the rough wood of the table. They looked older than 34. The skin around my knuckles was dry. My fingernails were short and unpolished. And there, on my left ring finger, the diamond still sat. It was heavy. Mark had always made sure to remind me of its weight, both in carats and in cost. It was a vintage heirloom, a symbol of the Vance family legacy. For 10 years, I had worn it like a badge of honor. Now, in the harsh light of the singular naked bulb hanging above me, it looked like a shackle. I twisted the band. It was tight. My finger had swollen slightly from the stress. Or perhaps the ring had just shrunk, trying to hold on to me one last time. I thought about Mark. I thought about the man I had met in college, the one who made me laugh, the one who had seemed so ambitious and protective. I thought about the slow, insidious way that protection had turned into possession. It would be easy to say he was a monster and I was a saint. It would be the perfect story for the internet, but the truth, the ugly, jagged truth that I had to live with, was more complicated. I had let him do it. I had stayed silent when the first insults came, thinking I could love him enough to change him. I had made myself small so he could feel big. I had apologized when I was right. I had accepted the crumbs of his affection and called it a feast. I was not just a victim. I was a volunteer in my own erasure. I had traded my self-worth for the illusion of a happy family, and that was a debt I would be paying off for the rest of my life. I pulled the ring over my knuckle. It resisted, scraping against the skin, leaving a red, angry mark behind. With a final tug, it came free. I placed it on the table. It clattered, a hollow, metallic sound that seemed too small for the magnitude of the moment. My finger felt naked. There was a pale, the white strip of skin where the gold had blocked the sun for a decade, a ghost of a marriage. I stared at that white strip, and suddenly, my chest heaved. A sob ripped through me, violent and ugly. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle the sound. Terrified of waking Leo, I cried. I cried until my throat burned and my eyes felt swollen shut. I did not cry for Mark. I did not cry for the house or the money. I cried for the 24-year-old girl who had walked down the aisle full of hope. I cried for the years of marketing experience I had let atrophy. I cried for the thousands of hours I had spent walking on eggshells, trying to predict the weather of another person's mood. I mourned the death of my innocence. I mourned the time I could never get back. The tears eventually stopped, leaving me hollowed out and exhausted. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my oversized sweater. I took a deep breath. The air in the apartment was stale, but it filled my lungs without resistance. I stood up and walked to the window. Below, the city was alive. People were fighting, loving, working, surviving. I was one of them now. I was starting over at 34 with a credit score of 0, a traumatized child, and a heart that looked like it had been put through a paper shredder. But as I looked at my reflection in the dark glass, I saw something that had been missing for a very long time. I saw Layla, not Mark's wife, not the parasite, just Layla. I picked up the ring one last time. I would sell it tomorrow. The money would pay for a deposit on a better apartment, or maybe a marketing course to refresh my skills. I would turn the symbol of my captivity into the key to my freedom. I turned off the light. The darkness wrapped around me, not as a threat, but as a blanket. I walked over to the mattress and lay down beside my son. I listened to the sirens outside, and for the first time in 10 years, I was not afraid of what the morning would bring. I was scarred. I was broke. I was alone, but I was free. We often look for the big explosions in a relationship, the physical violence, the obvious betrayals, but the most dangerous erosion of the soul happens in the quiet moments. It happens when you are made to feel crazy for asking a question. It happens when your partner controls the resources to control your behavior. It happens when you are called names under the guise of a joke. Layla's story is a work of fiction, but the dynamic of financial abuse and gaslighting is a terrifying reality for millions. The tragedy is not just that Mark was a villain. It is that Layla had to lose everything: her home, her security, her lifestyle, just to regain her right to exist as a human being. She won the court case, but she lost a decade of her life. Was it a victory? Or was it a rescue from a drowning ship she had helped to build? I leave you with this question to carry into your own life. If the price of keeping the peace is your own voice, are you in a relationship or are you in a cage?